Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Live, India's voice to the world. I'm Tanvi Taneja, coming up in the next 30 minutes. Italy is hosting world leaders, including Volodymyr Zelensky, in Rome for Ukraine's recovery. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says participants pledge over 10 billion euros for Ukraine's reconstruction. France's Macron meets UK's Starmer at 10 Downing Street, says EU needs to be involved in finding solutions for illegal migration. US President Donald Trump slaps 50% US tariffs on Brazilian imports starting in August, links tariffs to witch hunt against former President Jair Bolsonaro. Lula da Silva calls emergency meeting to address new tariffs. And new ASEAN India plan for action for years 2026 to 2030 adopted during their foreign ministers' meet in Kuala Lumpur. Rome is hosting a two-day conference on the reconstruction and recovery of Ukraine. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni welcomed leaders. The conference is aimed at mobilizing international support for Ukraine. European Commission has announced $2.7 billion in support to Ukraine. The funds include loan guarantees and additional grants from international and bilateral public financial institutions. The conference has pledged over $11.7 billion for the economic recovery of Ukraine.
The
message we want to send entrepreneurs today is simple. Do not be afraid to invest, to build, to rebuild in Ukraine. Because investing in Ukraine's reconstruction is not a gamble. It's an investment in a nation that has shown more resilience than any other. But it is also an investment in peace, in the economic growth of all Europe, and in the security of our citizens.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has welcomed the launch of a European fund aimed at mobilizing private investment for the reconstruction of Ukraine at a high-level conference in Rome on Thursday.
Economic growth requires freedom for the private sector to flourish. This is particularly important in the case of Ukraine because the enormous cost of reconstruction cannot be financed through public funds alone. This is why you, Volodymyr, and I, when we met in Berlin a few weeks ago, met German companies which are active in Ukraine. What I can report back from that meeting is the enormous interest of private businesses in participating in Ukraine's reconstruction.
Leaders are inching towards Gaza ceasefire deal as talks are going on in a good direction between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and US President Donald Trump in the United States. Speaking in an interview with Fox Business Network's Mornings with Maria, Netanyahu said negotiations are focused on a 60-day ceasefire that would see half of the living and deceased hostages returned to Israel. He said Israel had set up its own system to prevent Hamas from diverting supplies.
And you have been meeting with President Trump about a potential ceasefire with Hamas. Where does that stand? Will you agree to some of these new recent demands of Hamas?
Well, look, we are talking about a 60-day ceasefire in which half the live hostages and half of the deceased hostages would be returned to Israel by these Hamas monsters, you know. And yes, I think we're getting closer to a deal. I think.
While Hamas on Wednesday said it would release 10 hostages as part of the Gaza ceasefire talks, after Israel struck an upbeat note about the prospects for a deal to stop the fighting in Gaza. The group's statement came after 4 days of indirect talks brokered by Qatar, and as the United States signaled its belief that the agreement for a 60-day truce would be struck before the end of the week. Of the 251 hostages seized during the assault on Israeli border communities near Gaza, 49 are still held in the territory, including 27 the Israeli military says are dead. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump is quite optimistic that there is a very good chance of a ceasefire in Gaza this week or the next, after meeting Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Tuesday for the second time in 2 days to discuss the situation in Gaza.
Well, we're talking about Gaza for the most part. I think we have a chance this week or next week. Not definitely. There's nothing definite about war and Gaza and all of the other places that we all deal with so much. But there's a very good chance that we'll have a settlement, an agreement of some kind this week and maybe next week if not.
London and Paris were working on Thursday to thrash out a deal on undocumented migrants crossing the English Channel in small boats on the last day of the French president's state visit to Britain. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and France's Emmanuel Macron headed inside for a summit with senior ministers focused on the thorny issue and other shared concerns. These include the volatile situation in the Middle East, continued support for Ukraine, and a reboot of defense ties, including joint missile development and nuclear cooperation. French President Emmanuel Macron said that EU needs to be involved in finding solutions to illegal migration. A so-called one-in, one-out migrant deal, details of which were reportedly still being discussed, would see migrants sent back to France in return for the UK accepting a similar number of migrants with strong asylum cases.
For us, it's about delivering the changes that the British people want to see. We all agree the situation in the Channel cannot go on as it is. So we're bringing new tactics into play and a new level of intent to tackle illegal migration and break the business model of the criminal.
I am pleased that this summit will firstly cement progress in terms of strategic thinking and joint action, but also enable us to move forward in terms of capabilities, including on more sensitive issues such as nuclear deterrence. Important work has been completed and we will return to this later.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen survived a no-confidence vote in the European Parliament on Thursday. The motion failed to get two-thirds majority it needed to pass, with 360 parliamentarians voting against the motion, while only 175 supporting it. The vote was initiated by far-right lawmakers who accused Ursula von der Leyen of undermining trust in the EU through unlawful actions. It was the first time since 2014 that a Commission President has faced such a motion. The then President, Jean-Claude Juncker, also survived the vote. On to Asia now. India's Minister of State for External Affairs, Pabitra Margarita, co-chaired a productive ASEAN India Foreign Ministers meet in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, with Secretary of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines, Teresa P. Lazaro. The leaders adopted a new ASEAN India Plan of Action for the years starting 2026 till 2030. Aimed at expanding cooperation and strengthening comprehensive strategic partnership, ASEAN India celebrate the Year of Tourism this year. Discussions focused on ways and means to further enhance people-to-people ties. The agreement proposes cooperation in digital disaster management, defense, economy, maritime and health sectors. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio signed a bilateral MOU on civil nuclear cooperation with his Malaysian counterpart on Thursday. Speaking during the signing ceremony in Kuala Lumpur, Rubio said that the MOU is an example of how it can be done at a time when several countries have expressed an interest in civil nuclear programs. The so-called 123 agreements establish a legally binding framework for significant peaceful nuclear cooperation between the United States and its partners.
Many countries in the world, some are in the headlines lately, who have expressed an interest in civil nuclear programs. And this is an example of how it can be done. And we're very grateful to be able to do it with such a close partner. Obviously, much work remains. We're anxious to move forward on the negotiations on the 123 agreement. And this is the next step forward in a country whose future is incredibly bright.
So the US-Malaysia nuclear cooperation MOU was signed at a time where tensions remain high between the US and Iran on nuclear issues following last month's US strikes on Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Moving on, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met China's Wang Yi on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur. The two sides praised the development of political dialogue and practical cooperation aimed at the increasing turbulence in global relations. Moscow and Beijing both oppose plans to militarize the Asia-Pacific region, including attempts to place military infrastructure similar to the one NATO has. Lavrov also held talks with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the summit. Washington has announced a staggering tariff of 50% on all imports from Brazil, following a public spat with its Brazilian counterpart Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva this week. In the letter posted on Truth Social, said that 50% tariff is linked to Brazil's treatment of former President Jair Bolsonaro, who is facing trial on the charges of plotting a coup to stop President Lula from taking office in 2023. Trump also accused Brazil of attacks on US tech companies. Trump was involved in a public spat with Lula earlier this week, while Brazilian president fired back on Wednesday, saying that the new tariffs would be met with reciprocal measures. Brazil has invoked reciprocity law in response to Trump's tariffs. President Lula said that he will not accept interference from anyone and added that no one is above international law. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev met in the United Arab Emirates on Thursday. The meeting was to finalize a peace agreement after nearly 4 decades of conflict. The two leaders' first formal encounter since this was their first formal encounter since they agreed on the draft text of the peace agreement. Peace talks began after Azerbaijan recaptured the Karabakh region in September 2023, prompting almost all of the territory's 100,000 Armenians to flee to Armenia. In a potential stumbling block to the deal, Azerbaijan has said that it wants Armenia to change its constitution, which it says makes implicit claims to its territory. Following Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent visit to Cyprus, marking the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister there in over 2 decades, DD India's Jessica Taneja spoke with the High Commissioner of Cyprus to India about the outcomes and evolving dynamics of the relationship between India and Cyprus.
We have with us the High Commissioner of Cyprus. Thank you for speaking to DD India and taking our time for us. Prime Minister Narendra Modi was in Cyprus just a few weeks ago, an important visit, especially when it comes to India-Cyprus relationship, and also a lot that Cyprus has to offer both as an EU member state as well as other important initiatives that the EU collectively works towards, particularly IMEC as well. Tell us about what did you make of this visit? How do you see the relationship moving forward now?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. As you know, Cyprus and India go back a long time regarding our bilateral relationship. Our President Makarios and your Prime Minister Nehru were the two co-founders of the non-aligned movement. Of course, after 2004, when we joined the European Union, we can no longer call ourselves non-aligned, but the strong bilateral sentiments prevail to this day. His Excellency stopped in Cyprus for 2 days. He had very important bilateral meetings with our side, with our president. There was a very powerful joint declaration issued. You can find it at the website of the Ministry of External Affairs. Basically, we continue our collaboration and we enhance it in several areas. Trade, of course, commerce, education, tourism, defense, and so many more.
You talk about defense as well as the India-Middle East economic European corridor. That's an important component of the relationship and part of the discussions this time around between the two leaders as well. Where are the two countries on IMEC project?
The famous IMEC, as you know, was announced in the G20 summit here in India. And even though Cyprus is not one of the original signatories like France and Italy, it is a member of the IMEC under the EU umbrella because the EU is a signatory. Now, As you know from your geography, Cyprus is the easternmost Mediterranean nation. Geographically speaking, somebody would have to reach Cyprus first, and then it would be the gateway into Europe. So we're very happy to be able to contribute, to participate in this great endeavor that for the next 10 years I think will occupy not only regional commerce but the global commerce. We can offer excellent facilitation services through our ports, logistical support. There are already some Indian shipping companies established in Cyprus, IT personnel, the list goes on and on. So we're very happy and very excited about this prospect.
You're watching Did India Live, still to come on the show. New Delhi's Jawaharlal Nehru University hosts the first annual academic conference on Indian knowledge systems. Renewable energy, EVs, clean tech and green hydrogen in focus at the India Energy Storage Week 2025. And Indian women's cricket team secures a series win over hosts England.
Jharkhand will mesmerize you with majestic nature, rich heritage and colorful culture.
Hello. Johar.
Johar. It fits perfectly.
Thank you.
Full workout ho gaya.
Ready?
Postcards from Jharkhand on National Geographic.
Welcome back. You're watching Did India Live. I'm Tanvi Taneja. Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi is hosting the first annual academic conference on Indian knowledge systems. India's Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar addressed the inaugural session of the conference at the JNU campus in New Delhi today. Speaking at the event, the Vice President stressed that India must not merely import global narratives, adding that the country's rise as a global power should go hand in hand with the growth of its intellectual and cultural influence. He underlined that the strength of a nation lies in the originality of its thought, the timelessness of its values, and the resilience of its intellectual traditions.
The British colonization brought forth the second interlude, when Indian knowledge system was stunted, stymied, and subverted. We adopted their practices. Marxist perversion replaced colonial distortion. And friends, even today, the shadows of those colonial misreadings continue to shape textbooks, curricula, and minds. This conference, I believe strongly, stands as a serious academic endeavor to correct a historical wrong. Now is the time to cast off the chains of borrowed narratives, inherited distortions. It is time to reclaim our intellectual sovereignty.
The conference on Indian knowledge systems will continue till the 12th of July. And from Delhi to Gujarat now, the two-day Vice Chancellors Conference of Central Universities began today at Kevadia with the participation of more than 50 Vice Chancellors of leading higher education institutions to review, assess and strategize the implementation of the National Education Policy 2020 since its inception. Organized by India's Ministry of Education, in collaboration with the Central University of Gujarat, the meeting aims to consolidate and map the institutional progress of central universities in mapping up the vision of Developed India, Viksit Bharat 2047. Speaking on the occasion, India's Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan said, in the last decade, India's higher education ecosystem has undergone a fundamental transformation, making it flexible, interdisciplinary, inclusive and innovation-driven. The minister also mentioned that as a result of positive policy initiatives, over 1,200 universities and over 46,000 colleges have been established, making India one of the largest education systems globally. The 11th edition of India Energy Storage Week, a premier international conference and exhibition, was held at the Yashobhoomi Convention Centre in New Delhi. The three-day conference, held from 8th to 10th of July, saw participation of delegates from over 20 countries and over 1,000 companies. The event aimed to promote innovation in the areas of energy, storage, electric vehicles and green hydrogen, and attract investments worth over 8,000 crore rupees. The India Energy Storage Week 2025 is proving to be a milestone towards establishing India as a global energy storage and manufacturing hub. India is expanding its footprint in its business sector across the globe. In Changzhou, China's bustling auto hub, Novelis, a company under the Aditya Birla Group, stands as a testament to the power of India's growth story. A visit to the facility highlighted how Indian firms are not just participating, but leading on the world stage, driving innovation in technology, manufacturing and R&D. Interactions with local officials and industry leaders further underscored the impact of Indian enterprises. Strengthening India's last-mile connectivity is key to reducing logistics costs and making it easier to do business. That's the message from Minister of State for Ports, Shipping and Waterways, Shantanu Thakur. Speaking at the CII conference on export logistics in New Delhi, the minister underlined that seamless connectivity and removal of bottlenecks are paramount if India is to sustain its growth momentum. He also called on all stakeholders, industry and government to work together on improving infrastructure and supply chains to help Indian exports become more competitive globally. The first of two diving support vessels, DSVs, named Nistar, have been delivered to the Indian Navy and are set to join the Eastern Fleet soon. This vessel is indigenously designed and constructed by the Hindustan Shipyard Limited in Visakhapatnam. It is a highly specialized warship designed for deep-sea diving and rescue operations. The induction of Nistar, with nearly 75% indigenous content, marks a significant step towards Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India initiatives. Nistar will usher in state-of-the-art capabilities in deep-sea diving and submarine rescue. The crest depicts an anchor symbolizing maritime dominance and stability, with the dolphin circling it, signifying a seafarer's friend and harbinger of fair weather. The ship's motto, "Deliverance with precision and bravery," truly embodies its role and capabilities. In unison, these elements represent the diving and submarine rescue roles of Nistar. On to sports now. Indian women's cricket team sealed a historic series triumph over England by winning the fourth T20 by 6 wickets at Old Trafford. The result gave India an unassailable 3-1 lead in the series, with the final game to be played at Edgbaston on Saturday. India's sublime bowling attack, led by Radha Yadav and Deepti Sharma, restricted England to 126 for 7. India's openers, Shafali Verma and Smriti Mandhana, came out firing. The two put up a 56-run partnership before Shafali Verma's dismissal in the 7th over. Jemima Rodriguez and captain Harmanpreet Kaur then put on a 48-run stand to lead India to a triumphant win. In football, Paris Saint-Germain are set to face Chelsea in the FIFA Club World Cup final on Sunday after claiming a commanding victory over Real Madrid in the semi-finals. Champions League winners PSG thrashed Real Madrid 4-0 to enter the finals of the tournament. Fabian Ruiz scored twice, while Dembele and Ramos scored one each to propel PSG to victory. Meanwhile, on Tuesday, Chelsea beat Fluminense 2-0 in New Jersey to reach the final of the Club World Cup. And in Wimbledon, Serbian tennis icon Novak Djokovic has advanced to the semi-finals of the Wimbledon. Novak Djokovic took one step closer to record-leveling 8th Wimbledon win as he battled past Flavio Cobolli. 2 more victories and Djokovic will be able to secure his record-extending 25th Grand Slam title. Djokovic's next challenger is world number 1 Jannik Sinner, who defeated Ben Shelton in the quarterfinals. Sinner has a slight upper hand over Djokovic. He leads Djokovic 5-4 in head-to-head record. Sinner's latest win over Djokovic came in the French Open semi-finals last month. And women's semi-finals of the Wimbledon will be played today. World number 1 Arna Sabalenka will make the third Wimbledon semi-final appearance of her career when she faces American Amanda Anisimova on Thursday. In the second semi-final, Iga Swiatek will face Switzerland's Belinda Bencic on Thursday. And that's all for this edition of DD India Live. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. Connect with us on our different social media handles at DD India Live. And you can also download our DD India mobile app for quick news and updates on the go. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Tanvi Taneja from all of us here in New Delhi. Thank you for watching. Namaskar.